When your children don't respect you, do this. Instead, 6 powerful ways to regain respect. Have you ever looked into your adult child's eyes and seen something that broke your heart? Not love or warmth, but dismissal? Just last week, I sat across from Martha, a 72-year-old grandmother whose hands trembled as she told me, "Dr. Bob, my daughter treated the waiter at lunch with more respect than she showed me." She checked her phone while I was talking, interrupted me 3 times, and then had the nerve to tell everyone I was being sensitive when I got quiet. What happens when this disrespect continues for years? I've seen it destroy retirements, lead to depression, and create family fractures that sometimes never heal. The pain isn't just emotional, it can literally affect your health and longevity. After 47 years as a family counselor, and now at 78 years old myself, I've not only helped thousands of parents through this exact situation, I've lived it personally. The day my son implied I was out of touch at a family gathering, I still remember how the room seemed to go silent around me while everyone pretended not to notice. If you felt that ache, that hollow feeling when the person you raised treats you like you're somehow less, I want you to know 2 things. First, you're not alone. And second, there is a way forward that doesn't involve confrontation or begging for the respect you deserve. If you're finding this valuable already, take a quick second to click subscribe and the bell icon. Our community shares these wisdom moments every week, and I'd hate for you to miss the exact insight that might heal your relationship. What I'm about to share with you today isn't just theory from a textbook. These are 6 approaches that have mended thousands of parent-child relationships in my practice. Approaches that don't require your children to change first. You can transform the dynamic starting today. And I need to warn you about something. Pay special attention to number 4. It's the strategy most parents initially resist, sometimes even getting angry with me for suggesting it, but it's often the exact turning point that changes everything. The painful reality we don't discuss. Before we explore solutions, I want to acknowledge what you might be feeling right now. Some of you are nodding as you watch this. Some of you might have tears in your eyes. Because when our children dismiss us, interrupt us, or make decisions without considering our feelings, it's not just annoying. It cuts to the very core of who we are. Think about it. For decades you were needed, the authority, the protector, the guide. The one they ran to with scraped knees and broken hearts. The one whose opinion mattered above all others. And then one day, you give the same advice you've always given, from the same heart that's always loved them. But now it's met with an eye roll or a dismissive, "Things are different now, Mom." Joseph, a 68-year-old retired engineer I worked with, sat in that chair right there and broke down. This strong, accomplished man who'd built bridges and designed systems that thousands rely on daily. He told me, "When my son dismissed my suggestion about his home renovation with 'That's outdated, Dad,' I smiled and changed the subject. But inside, I felt like he wasn't just rejecting my idea. He was erasing everything I've learned in my lifetime." Does that sound familiar? Have you smiled through that pain too? And here's what makes it worse. As we age, we already face a society that increasingly looks past us. The clerk who speaks to our younger companion instead of us. The doctor who talks about us rather than to us. But when that invisibility extends to our own children, the very people we poured our lives into, it creates a grief unlike any other. I want you to type, "I deserve respect" in the comments if you're feeling this right now. Let's create a moment of community for each other. But here's what 47 years of counseling families has taught me. The path to regaining respect isn't through confrontation or complaints. I've watched those approaches backfire hundreds of times, deepening the divide. Instead, it requires something much more powerful, a transformation in how you show up in the relationship. 1. Stop chasing their approval. Let me tell you about Elaine. At 75, this elegant, intelligent woman who'd raised 3 successful children found herself constantly rearranging her life to accommodate her family. She came to me exhausted and confused. "I don't understand it, Dr. Bob," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm always available. Last month, I canceled my dental appointment when my daughter needed emergency babysitting. I listened to their problems for hours but never burdened them with mine. I thought my selflessness would make them value me more. Instead, they treat me like I'm their employee. My son actually texted me, We need you here at 10 a.m. tomorrow without even asking if I was free. How many of you have felt like unpaid staff in your children's lives? Type "that's me" in the comments if you've experienced this. Here's what decades of family counseling has taught me. When we constantly chase our children's approval, always adjusting our schedules to their convenience, swallowing our true opinions to avoid conflict, essentially becoming supporting characters in our own lives, we unintentionally teach them that we don't deserve equal consideration. I call this the respect paradox. People rarely value what they don't have to earn. Think about it. In every area of life, we appreciate what requires effort. When your availability, agreement, and assistance are guaranteed, regardless of how you're treated, there's simply no incentive to earn them. Maria, another client, discovered this truth when she did something that terrified her. She finally declined her daughter's last-minute request to watch her grandchildren because, imagine this, Maria had concert tickets she'd been looking forward to for months. "I was shaking when I said no," she told me. "I was sure my daughter would be furious. And yes, there was tension initially. She made that little huffing sound she's made since she was a teenager. But Dr. Bob, the miracle happened the very next week. My daughter called me 3 days in advance, 3 days, to ask about my schedule before making her plans. It was the first time in years she'd considered my life before making demands. Self-respect is the foundation of all respect. Your children don't learn how to treat you from your lectures or your complaints. They learn by watching how you treat yourself. When you demonstrate through actions that your time has value, your opinions matter, and your needs deserve consideration, you establish a template for how they should interact with you. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or unavailable. It simply means bringing balance to the relationship. Help when you genuinely want to, not from fear or rejection. Express your honest thoughts, not just what you think will keep the peace. Make yourself a priority, not an afterthought in your own life. And yes, this first step is often the hardest. But I've witnessed this transformation hundreds of times. When you stop chasing approval, you paradoxically become more likely to receive it. 2. Lead by example. When Robert's son made a dismissive comment about his technology skills during a family gathering, Robert's first instinct was to defend himself or respond with his own cutting remark. Instead, he paused, looked his son in the eye, and said calmly, "That comment felt disrespectful. I'd appreciate being spoken to differently." Then, and this was crucial, he changed the subject and continued enjoying the gathering, rather than letting the moment define the entire interaction. 2 weeks later, his son called to apologize. "Dad," he said, "I've been thinking about how I spoke to you. You were right, and I'm sorry. I wouldn't talk to anyone else that way. I shouldn't talk to you that way either." What happened here? Robert demonstrated dignity under pressure. He didn't escalate with anger, didn't sulk in hurt feelings, and didn't lecture. He simply named the behavior, requested a change, and moved forward with composure. This approach works because respect isn't primarily taught through words, it's modeled through behavior. When you respond to disrespect with emotional reactivity, you inadvertently reinforce the dynamic of being treated as less than. When you respond with calm dignity, you create a stark contrast that often prompts reflection. Think about people you deeply respect. Do they demand your respect through complaints or threats? Or do they earn it through how they carry themselves, how they treat others, and how they respond to challenges? Eleanor Roosevelt famously said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." When you refuse to consent to disrespectful treatment, not through anger but through quiet dignity, you reclaim your position of respect. This doesn't mean suppressing your feelings. It means communicating them in a way that demonstrates self-respect. "I notice I'm being interrupted frequently and I'd like to finish my thought" is very different from "You always interrupt me, you never listen." Your presence, calm, assured, and dignified, speaks volumes in these moments. It reminds your adult children, at a subconscious level, of the parent who once represented stability and authority in their lives. 3. Withdraw emotional dependence. Margaret's relationship with her children transformed when she made one profound internal shift. She stopped making her emotional well-being dependent on their approval. "I realized I was hanging on their every word, analyzing every interaction for signs of their love and approval," she confessed. "If they called, my day was made. If they seemed distant, I'd spiral into worry and hurt. I was essentially making them responsible for my happiness, and that's too heavy a burden to place on anyone. What Margaret discovered is a psychological principle I've seen proven true countless times. Emotional independence creates magnetic respect. When your sense of self-worth and contentment comes from within, rather than requiring constant external validation from your children, you become someone they want to connect with rather than someone they feel obligated to manage. Think about it this way. When someone's emotional state seems entirely dependent on our actions, we often feel trapped, resentful, or manipulated. Even if that's not their intention, we begin to dread interactions because they feel heavy with expectation. William experienced this after his wife passed away. His grief was profound, and understandably, he leaned heavily on his daughters for emotional support. But as months passed, he noticed they seemed to avoid deeper conversations and kept their calls brief. During our sessions, he realized they were withdrawing because every interaction had become emotionally draining. They felt responsible for his happiness but powerless to provide it. The turning point came when William joined a grief support group and rekindled old friendships. He started therapy and began journaling. Gradually, he developed emotional resources beyond his children. When they called and asked, "How are you, Dad?" he could honestly say, "I'm finding my way," instead of offloading his deepest struggles each time. The weight lifted from our relationship was incredible, he told me. Now when my daughters call, it's because they want to, not because they're checking a worry box. And strangely, now that I don't need their calls to feel okay, we talk more frequently and more honestly than before. This principle applies to all forms of emotional dependence, whether it's needing your children's approval of your choices, requiring their agreement with your views, or depending on their inclusion of you in their lives to feel valued. When you cultivate emotional self-sufficiency, finding joy, purpose, and connection beyond your relationship with your children, you transform from someone who needs them into someone they need. Your wisdom becomes a gift rather than an obligation. 4. Set and enforce boundaries. I mentioned earlier that this fourth strategy is often the turning point. It's also the one that creates the most resistance, both from my clients when I suggest it and from their children when they implement it. Let me explain why through Helen's story. Helen, at 76, dreaded her weekly calls with her son. What should have been moments of connection had become sessions of subtle criticism about everything from her decision to continue living alone to her choice of activities. "You're just being stubborn about that house, Mom," or "Shouldn't you be doing something more substantial with your time?" Every conversation left her feeling diminished, defensive, and honestly, a little smaller. After our third session together, Helen made a decision that absolutely terrified her. In fact, she told me her hands were sweating just thinking about it. She decided to set a clear boundary around how she would allow herself to be spoken to, even if it meant risking the relationship she treasured. The next time her son made a dismissive comment about her stubbornness in maintaining her independence, I coached Helen to take a deep breath and say these exact words. "I understand you're concerned, but I need you to speak to me with the same respect you'd show a colleague. If the conversation continues in this tone, I'll need to end the call and try again another day." When her son continued his criticism, saying, "You're just being oversensitive again," Helen did something she'd never done in her life. She gently said, "I love you, and I look forward to talking when we can communicate differently," and ended the call. She later told me she was physically shaking when she hung up. For 3 long days, she heard nothing from him. She called me twice, questioning her decision, wondering if she'd just destroyed her relationship with her only son. But on the 4th day, something extraordinary happened. Her son called back. And while the conversation wasn't perfect, his tone had shifted noticeably. He actually asked about her garden, something he hadn't shown interest in for years. And 3 weeks later, he called to ask her opinion about a career decision he was facing. "I want you to really understand what happened here." This story illustrates a fundamental truth that's transformed thousands of my clients' relationships. People treat us according to the standards we set. When we consistently accept disrespect, whether it's being interrupted, having our opinions dismissed, or being spoken to condescendingly, we unintentionally communicate that this treatment is acceptable. Setting boundaries isn't about ultimatums or punishment. It's about clearly defining how you need to be treated for the relationship to thrive. Here are the key elements. Clarity. Define specific behaviors that feel disrespectful rather than making general accusations. Not "you're always rude," but "when I'm interrupted mid-sentence, I feel disrespected." Communication. Express your boundary calmly and directly, without lengthy justifications or emotional appeals. Consequences. Identify what will happen if the boundary is crossed, not as a threat, but as information about how you'll protect yourself. Consistency. This is where most people fail. You must follow through on stated consequences every single time the boundary is crossed. Let me share one more quick example that shows how powerful this approach can be. James, a 70-year-old father of 2 adult daughters, had endured years of family gatherings where his daughters talked over him, checked their phones while he spoke, or dismissed his stories as ones they'd heard 1,000,000 times. After working together, his boundary became simple. I value our family time, and I need everyone to be present. No phones at the table, and each person gets to speak without interruption. If that doesn't work for anyone, I understand, but those will be the expectations when we gather at my home. His daughters were initially resistant. One even accused him of being controlling. But when they saw he was serious, when he actually ended one dinner early after his boundary was repeatedly ignored, something remarkable happened. Not only did family gatherings become more respectful, but this standard began extending beyond the dinner table. James told me with tears in his eyes, "My younger daughter called last week and said she started implementing the same no phones, no interrupting rule with her teenagers. She actually thanked me, saying she never realized how much those small disrespectful behaviors affected real connection until she experienced the difference." If you remember nothing else from our time together today, remember this. When you set and maintain clear boundaries, you aren't just changing how you're treated today, you're potentially healing patterns that might otherwise continue for generations. In the comments, I'd love to hear, what boundary have you been afraid to set with your adult children? Share it below and I'll personally respond. 5. Stop giving without appreciation. For decades, Patricia was the family safety net. She provided free childcare, emergency loans, and was the host of every holiday gathering. But as years passed, these contributions became expected rather than appreciated. Her children would drop off grandkids with minimal notice, borrow money without clear repayment plans, and arrive empty-handed to elaborate meals she'd spent days preparing. "I felt like a service provider, not a parent," she admitted. The breaking point came when my daughter was annoyed that I couldn't watch the grandchildren because I had a doctor's appointment. She actually said, "Can't you reschedule? This is important." Patricia's situation highlights a pattern I've observed countless times. When giving becomes disconnected from appreciation, resentment grows and respect diminishes on both sides. The parent feels devalued. The child comes to view the parent's contributions as entitlements rather than gifts. The solution isn't to stop giving entirely. Generosity is one of life's great joys, especially with family. Rather, it's about ensuring your giving is recognized and reciprocal. Patricia began making subtle but significant changes. She still offered childcare but required 48 hours notice except in true emergencies. She continued hosting holidays but asked each family to bring a specific dish. When lending money, she created simple written agreements about repayment. Most importantly, she started acknowledging good behavior rather than just tolerating bad behavior. When her son thanked her meaningfully for watching his children, she said, "I appreciate your recognition. It makes me happy to help when I feel respected." When her daughter brought a beautiful dessert to Sunday dinner without being asked, Patricia made a point of expressing how valued that made her feel. This approach, conditioning generosity on basic respect and appreciation, often creates initial resistance. Patricia's daughter was notably cool toward her for several weeks after the new boundaries were established. But gradually the family dynamic rebalanced. "The amazing thing," Patricia told me 6 months later, "is that I actually give less now in terms of time and resources, but I feel more generous because what I do give is seen and valued. And my children seem to appreciate the smaller contributions more than they did the larger ones when those were expected." This principle extends beyond material giving to emotional and practical support as well. When you've been the constant problem solver, the always available listener, the reliable helper, creating some scarcity in these resources often leads to their greater appreciation. Charles, a 74-year-old father who had always been on call for household repairs at both his children's homes, decided to limit his help to one project per month per child. Not only did his children become more selective about what they asked for, but his son actually began asking for advice about handling some repairs himself, a form of respect for Charles's knowledge that had been absent when his help was unlimited. The transition from giving without conditions to giving with expectations of basic appreciation can feel uncomfortable. Many parents worry it seems selfish or unloving. But consider this perspective. By allowing your contributions to be taken for granted, you're not only diminishing your own value in the relationship, you're also denying your children the opportunity to experience gratitude, which research consistently shows is essential for psychological well-being. 6. Build a life outside of your children. Thomas had dedicated his retirement years to being available for his children and grandchildren. He'd moved to be closer to them, scheduled his activities around their availability, and essentially made them the center of his universe. Yet despite this devotion, he often felt peripheral to their lives, included out of obligation rather than desire. The transformation in his family dynamic began not with a conversation, but with a cooking class. Thomas had always enjoyed cooking but had never pursued it seriously. When he joined a weekly gourmet cooking group, he expected it to be just a pleasant diversion. He didn't expect it to revolutionize his relationship with his children. As he developed new friendships, acquired impressive culinary skills, and began hosting dinner parties for his new social circle, something shifted in how his family saw him. He was no longer just dad or grandpa waiting for their attention. He was a person with his own interesting life, skills, and social connections. "My daughter actually called to ask if I was free for lunch," he told me with amazement. "She said she wanted to hear more about the Mediterranean cooking techniques I was learning." It was the first time in years she'd sought out my company rather than just responding to my invitations. This pattern repeats itself remarkably consistently. When parents build meaningful lives that extend beyond their children, whether through education, hobbies, volunteer work, travel, new relationships, or creative pursuits, their children often begin to see them through fresh eyes. There's a psychological principle at work here that marketing experts have understood for decades. Perceived value increases with perceived demand. When your calendar is full, your interests are diverse, and your sense of purpose extends beyond family roles, you naturally become more intriguing. Elizabeth, a 69-year-old mother of 3, experienced this after joining a community theater group. "My son actually asked if he could come see my performance," she said with delight. And afterward, he introduced me to his friends with this tone of, I can only call it pride. I hadn't heard that from him since he was a little boy showing off my cookie baking skills to his friends. Building a life outside your children serves multiple purposes. It reduces the pressure on them to be your primary source of fulfillment. It demonstrates your capability and independence. It provides you with new experiences and knowledge to share. It creates healthy space in the relationship. It reminds them that your identity extends beyond parenthood. Grace discovered this power when she returned to college at 71 to complete the degree she'd abandoned to raise her family. Her adult children, who had grown somewhat patronizing about her intellectual capabilities, were first surprised, then impressed, and finally actively supportive of her academic journey. My younger son, who works in higher education, started calling me for discussions about the books I was reading for class, she shared. It was the first time in decades he'd engaged with me as an intellectual equal, rather than just as his mother. The message here isn't that you should fill your calendar with activities solely to impress your children. Rather, it's about authentically pursuing the full, rich life you deserve, and allowing your children to witness that journey. When they see you embracing growth, connection, and purpose in your later years, it challenges any narrative they might hold about you as diminished, dependent, or defined solely by your relationship to them. It reminds them of the complete, complex person you've always been. Conclusion. As we reach the end of our time together today, I want you to take a deep breath with me. The journey we've discussed isn't an easy one. I know because I've walked it myself. The day I finally stopped answering my son's calls when I knew they'd only be requests for money, not for my company or wisdom, was one of the hardest days of my life. My hand shook as I let the phone ring. But it was the first step toward healing our relationship. Shows personal photo of Dr. Bob with his family, smiling. This is us now. Not perfect, but real. Connected through respect, not obligation. Let's remember what we've discovered together. Counts on fingers, with text appearing on screen with each point. When you stop chasing their approval and honor your own needs, you silently teach them that you deserve consideration. When you respond to disrespect with dignity rather than defensiveness, you show them what respect actually looks like. When you build emotional independence, you transform from someone who needs them into someone they actually want to talk to. When you set clear boundaries, even when it feels terrifying, you establish the standard for how you deserve to be treated. When you ensure your giving is met with appreciation, you restore the natural balance that makes relationships thrive. When you build a rich life beyond being just their parent, you remind them of your complete humanity. I've received thousands of letters and emails over the years from parents who've applied these principles. Let me share what Margaret wrote to me 6 months after our work together. Dr. Bob, I need to tell you what happened yesterday. My daughter, the one who used to dismiss everything I said, actually called me for advice. Not about the grandkids, not about something practical, but about her own feelings. We talked for an hour. For years, I thought respect from my children was something I needed to earn through endless giving or something I could demand through guilt. Now I understand it's something I cultivate by respecting myself first. Our relationship isn't perfect, but it's real in a way it hasn't been since she was little. I'd like you to share your own story in the comments. Where are you in this journey? Which of these 6 approaches feels most challenging to you? Our community is here to support you. If this video has touched something in your heart today, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to our channel and perhaps share this with someone else who might be silently struggling with this pain. Your support helps us continue providing guidance for navigating life's later chapters with dignity. I want to leave you with this. It's never too late to transform a relationship. I've seen healing begin after decades of distance. Every interaction, starting today, is an opportunity to set a new pattern, to demonstrate quiet self-respect, and to inspire the respect of others, especially those whose opinion matters most to your heart. Next week, I'll be talking about how to handle family gatherings when disrespect has been the norm. I hope you'll join me then. Until then, this is Dr. Bob, reminding you that you've earned every bit of the respect you deserve.